Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in your life when silence becomes more powerful than every explanation you've ever given. A moment when you stop trying to convince the world of who you are and start showing it. People may ignore your words, but they cannot ignore your transformation. They cannot ignore consistency. They cannot ignore results. And the day you stop explaining yourself and begin acting with purpose is the day the world finally pays attention, not because you asked, but because you became impossible to overlook. When we spend our lives explaining ourselves, defending our choices, and convincing others why we deserve respect, we slowly give away our power. But something remarkable happens the moment we shift from explanation to action. The world begins to pay attention in a different way. People notice the silence that comes when you stop seeking approval and instead let your behavior speak for you. They notice the confidence that doesn't yell, doesn't argue, and doesn't beg for understanding. They notice the quiet transformation that happens when you stop talking about what you're going to do and simply start doing it. There is a certain energy in action that no amount of words can match. Words can be dismissed. Explanations can be twisted. Promises can be forgotten, but action leaves footprints, it creates evidence, it builds a story that cannot be denied. When you start acting on your intentions, you create momentum. Momentum that doesn't depend on anyone else's belief in you. The most powerful people aren't the ones who talk the loudest. They're the ones who consistently move in the direction of what they believe, even when no one is clapping. And the truth is, many people won't understand your vision at first, not because it's wrong, but because it's yours. They don't see what you see. They don't feel what you feel. They don't lie awake at night, thinking about the future you're trying to build. So when you explain yourself to them, you're asking them to interpret something they were never meant to carry. That's why action becomes your greatest translator. It shows what words fail to communicate. It paints the picture others cannot imagine on their own. The moment you stop explaining, you reclaim your time, your focus, and your self-respect. You stop performing for an audience that never bought a ticket. Instead, you direct that energy inward into growth, into improvement, into discipline. People may question your silence at first. They might wonder why you're not responding the way you used to, but eventually they'll understand. Because the results of consistent action are impossible to ignore. When you start acting, something shifts inside you as well. You begin to trust yourself more. You learn that clarity comes from doing, not from overthinking or overtalking. You realize that the gap between where you are and where you want to be can only be crossed one step at a time, not through endless discussions about the perfect path. Progress rewards those who move, not those who wait for validation, and that's why the world begins to notice. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because action creates change, and change creates impact. People are drawn to individuals who are willing to bet on themselves without needing permission. They're inspired by those who choose courage over comfort, persistence over excuses, and purpose over popularity. You become an example not because you ask to be, but because your actions speak louder than any explanation ever could. There will always be those who doubt you, criticize you, or underestimate you, but their opinions lose power the moment you no longer feel the need to respond. Silence can be a declaration, action can be a statement, progress can be a response louder than any argument. You don't have to prove who you are, you don't have to justify your dreams. You don't have to convince anyone that you're capable. Let them watch, let them assume whatever they want. Your job is to move, to improve, to build, to grow. Because sooner or later, the same people who questioned you will be the ones wondering how you did it. And the answer will be simple. You stopped explaining and you started acting. And when that shift happens, when your life begins to revolve around action instead of explanation, something even more powerful begins to unfold. Your relationship with yourself transforms. You start realizing that you no longer need permission to take the next step. You no longer seek applause to feel worthy. You no longer measure your progress by how many people approve of your decisions. Instead, your measure becomes your own growth, your own discipline, your own resilience. You stop waiting for the world to tell you you're ready. You decide that readiness comes from movement, not from consensus. This is when your vision gains strength, because a vision grows in the soil of consistent action, not in the echo chamber of endless discussions. Each step you take, no matter how small, becomes proof to yourself that you're capable of more. You begin to understand that clarity isn't found in talking about change, it's found in making change. You learn that the courage you've been searching for appears the moment you stop preparing to move and actually move. And with every new action, you start rewriting the story you once told yourself about your limitations. People will start sensing this shift even if you never say a word. They'll notice how focused you've become. They'll notice how you use your time differently. They'll notice that you're no longer engaging in the same conversations you once did. You're no longer explaining your choices out of insecurity. You're following them with conviction, and this is where respect begins to grow. Respect is rarely earned through words. It's earned through consistency, discipline, and integrity. When your actions align with your beliefs, people feel it. You also begin to attract new opportunities, not because you're lucky, but because you're prepared. Action creates motion, and motion draws direction. The more you act, the more the path begins to reveal itself. Doors open not because you stood outside explaining why you deserved to be let in, but because your work became undeniable. People gravitate toward momentum. They're inspired by those who move with purpose. They want to be near those who rise not through arrogance, but through determination. What's even more surprising is how your silence becomes a form of strength. You no longer need to justify why you're working late, why you're choosing a different path, why you're distancing yourself from certain people, or why your priorities have changed. Your silence is not avoidance, it's intention. It's a declaration that you are focused on building, not debating. When you understand your purpose, you stop wasting energy trying to convince others to understand it too. And yet, this silence will also challenge some people. Not everyone will applaud your growth. Some will misinterpret it. Some will feel threatened by it. Some will wish you stayed the version of yourself that was easier to understand and easier to control. But don't let this distract you. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. Their confusion is not your burden. Keep moving, keep acting, keep growing, because those who truly value you will recognize the discipline behind your silence and the intention behind your choices. As you continue on this path, you begin to realize that action doesn't just change how people see you, it changes how you see the world. You start noticing opportunities where you once saw obstacles. You start recognizing your own progress where you once saw slow results. You become less reactive to negativity and more responsive to purpose. You learn to differentiate between noise and guidance, between distractions and direction. And as your awareness sharpens, your confidence grows, not the loud confidence that seeks validation, but the quiet confidence that comes from self-trust. With every step, you build habits that reinforce who you're becoming. You wake up with intention. You show up even when motivation is low. You follow through even when no one is watching. And that's where transformation really happens, not in the extraordinary moments, but in the ordinary ones where you choose discipline over doubt, action over explanation, and persistence over perfection. People will eventually notice the difference in your posture, your energy, your focus. They'll see someone who is no longer held back by the need to be understood. Someone who no longer explains their dreams, they simply pursue them. Someone who no longer announces their plans, they execute them. Someone whose growth can be seen, not because they talk about it, but because they live it. And without saying a word, your actions will communicate everything that once required paragraphs of explanation. They will show who you are, what you value, and where you're headed. They will reveal your resilience, your commitment, and your courage. They will inspire others in ways you didn't expect. Because when you stop explaining and start acting, you don't just change yourself, you change the atmosphere around you. And as this atmosphere shifts, you begin to notice how your life starts aligning with a different rhythm, one guided by purpose instead of pressure. You realize that the more you act with intention, the less you feel the need to look over your shoulder. You stop checking who's watching, who's doubting, or who's waiting for you to fail. Your focus sharpens to the point where external noise no longer dictates your direction. You live by a quieter standard now, one measured not by applause, but by progress, not by validation, but by alignment. This is the stage where growth becomes natural, not effortless, but natural. You no longer wrestle with the same internal friction that once held you back. You're not fighting for motivation, you're moving with discipline. You're not searching for clarity, you're creating it through action. You're not comparing yourself to others, you're competing with the previous version of you. And this shift, this internal recalibration starts reflecting in how you walk, how you speak, how you choose, and how you carry yourself. People notice when you take responsibility for your life in a way that doesn't require dramatics. They notice when you no longer participate in meaningless arguments, when you let your results speak for your intentions. They notice when you stop explaining why you're distant, why you're focused, why you're working differently. They notice because action reveals truth more clearly than any explanation ever could. And what's even more profound is how this shift influences your resilience. When you stop explaining and start acting, you learn to welcome the challenges on your path. You no longer fear obstacles. You see them as opportunities to refine your strength. You understand that setbacks aren't punishments, they're feedback. They teach you where to adjust, where to grow, where to reinforce your foundation. You stop avoiding discomfort and instead move toward it because you know it's the place where transformation begins. While others wait for the perfect moment, you learn to move in imperfect conditions. While others pause to justify their lack of progress, you continue forward even if the pace is slow. And in that consistency, you discover something rare, the ability to trust your own journey. You start believing in the value of small steps, in the power of daily effort, in the quiet momentum that builds beneath the surface long before results become visible. Over time, this consistency creates a stark contrast between who you used to be and who you are becoming. People who once dismissed your dreams now observe your actions with curiosity. People who underestimated your discipline now find themselves inspired by your commitment. Some may even begin seeking your advice, not because you positioned yourself as a teacher, but because you proved yourself through motion. Your transformation becomes undeniable, not because you advertised it, but because you embodied it. You'll also start noticing new levels of peace within yourself. When you stop defending your intentions to others, you free yourself from unnecessary emotional drains. You protect your energy, you safeguard your focus. You learn the difference between sharing your journey and explaining your worth. When you share, you connect. When you explain, you seek permission. You learn to choose connection over justification, authenticity over approval, movement over noise. As your actions shape your identity, you begin understanding that the world responds to consistency, not claims. It responds to proof, not promises. It responds to those who show up, not those who merely announce that they will. And with this understanding, you build a life that gets stronger with each step, a life held together by deliberate choices, daily habits, and a mindset rooted in perseverance. This is where your confidence evolves into something deeper, not the kind of confidence that needs recognition, but the kind that rests in self-awareness. The kind that knows, I am becoming someone my future will thank me for. The kind that no criticism can shake because it wasn't built on external validation. The kind that doesn't need to be defended because it's reinforced every day by action. And perhaps most importantly, you begin recognizing that your silence is not emptiness, it's focus. Your actions are not arrogance, they're alignment. Your growth is not distance, it's direction. You're not pulling away from people, you're moving toward a higher version of yourself. Those who are meant to grow with you will understand. Those who aren't will step aside. Either way, your journey continues. The more you act, the more your life expands. The more you move, the more opportunities find you. The more you trust yourself, the more courage becomes part of your nature. And the world will always notice, not because you demanded attention, but because a person who stops explaining and starts acting becomes impossible to ignore. And as your journey continues from this point, something even more meaningful begins to take shape within you. You start understanding the power of alignment between who you are, who you want to become, and what you're willing to do to get there. Action becomes more than a habit. It becomes a philosophy. It becomes the language through which you communicate your ambition to the world. Not through explanation, not through persuasion, but through the steady, unwavering rhythm of effort that cannot be faked. You begin noticing how your priorities naturally rise to the surface. The things that once distracted you, drained you, or pulled you off course lose their grip because you've built an internal compass that points you toward growth. You no longer chase approval because you're too busy chasing progress. You no longer defend your choices because you've learned that your actions will reveal your reasoning far better than any explanation ever could. And without even trying, you start inspiring others not with speeches or declarations, but with the example you set through your behavior. There is a certain humility that comes with this stage of growth. Acting without explaining doesn't mean you're above anyone, it means you're finally aligned with what matters. You develop a deeper respect for discipline, for patience, for persistence. You begin understanding that greatness isn't built in loud moments of inspiration, but in quiet decisions repeated day after day. You realize that the true transformation happens long before anyone else notices. It happens in the early mornings when no one is awake, in the late nights when no one is watching, in the small choices that look insignificant to the world but monumental to your future. And what's even more powerful is how your relationship with failure begins to change. When you stop explaining, you stop fearing mistakes because you're no longer trying to convince others that you're perfect. You start embracing failure as part of the journey, as a teacher rather than an enemy. You learn to adjust, adapt, and continue, instead of stalling to justify why something didn't go as planned. You gain courage from the act of moving forward, even when conditions aren't ideal. You start seeing setbacks not as reasons to stop, but as reminders that you're stretching beyond familiarity and stepping into growth. With every new decision, with every new step forward, you build a reputation with yourself, one of trust and reliability. You learn that keeping promises to yourself is far more important than keeping up appearances for others. You understand that the version of you who acts, even when it's difficult, even when it's lonely, even when it's uncertain, is the version shaping your future in real time. And the moment you prioritize that version is the moment your life begins to rise in ways explanation alone could never achieve. People around you will respond to this shift in different ways. Some will admire your discipline. Some will be confused by your silence. Some may distance themselves because your growth highlights their stagnation. But none of that changes your direction. You keep moving because movement has become your truth. You keep building because you've learned that growth is not an event. It's a lifestyle. You keep choosing consistency because you've seen how powerfully it compounds over time, and gradually the gap between who you were and who you're becoming grows wider. Not because you forced it, but because you acted your way into a new identity. You wake up one day and realize you're no longer driven by the same insecurities, the same doubts, the same need for validation. Your focus has shifted inward to discipline, to purpose, to becoming a person who leads through example rather than explanation. Those who observe your journey will notice the subtle changes, the confidence in your decisions, the clarity in your actions, the consistency in your effort. They'll notice the way you value your time differently, the way you protect your energy, the way you choose your battles with discernment. They'll notice that your silence is no longer a sign of retreat, but a sign of mastery. They'll notice that your actions communicate a level of commitment that words simply cannot express. In this consistent alignment, this quiet power begins to shape the world around you. Opportunities that once seemed out of reach begin to surface. Connections that once felt distant begin to form. Circumstances begin to shift because your internal world has shifted. You are no longer the person waiting to be understood. You are the person driven by understanding yourself. You are no longer explaining your path, you are walking it. You are no longer hoping for direction, you are creating it. And as you move forward, your journey becomes its own message, a message that requires no explanation, no justification, no convincing. A message written in your discipline, your resilience, your choices, and your actions. A message people can feel even before they hear it. A message that continues to grow with every step you take.